play with Kevin Borich? How did that come about?
Well, I supported Kev on his first gig in Australia with the La-Di-Das at Ward Austin's Jungle, which was in York Street, in 1967 on his first night. And so we met there, and I'm a massive La-Di-Das fan, because when the La-Di-Das came to Australia, they made the Aussie bands look quite amateurish.
Really?
Oh, totally.
Right.
They were. You know, that band, we were like Australian musicians when you saw them. You just shook your head. You've never seen anything like it. Like an overseas band. I think the chemistry between those guys was amazing. And they were like clothes horses, like Carnaby Street. They dressed amazing. The Carnaby Street suits, playing Motown and all the great hits. And when we, you know, like just like Max Mirror and the Meteors were, in a way, the same thing. There was no Australian band that could anywhere go near Max Mirror and the Meteors. We all knew that they were it. And same with the La-Di-Das. They were so way ahead of any Australian band. Most bands in Australia, just about all bands in Australia, sounded amateurish compared to the La-Di-Das and Max Mirror and the Meteors, which shows you New Zealand, for some reason, had a higher standard of chemistry, of arrangements, and taking on the harder stuff.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm just curious as to why that should have been.
Well, if you had seen them and seen the Australian bands, we were quite sloppy.
Right.
These guys were well seasoned, tight, and really on it.
Right.
So, I mean, we learned a lot of those two bands because they showed us what was possible.
Mm. Mm.
And the singer with La-Di-Das, I mean, he was Phil Key, and he was just amazing. He was just a voice, soul voice that you hankered after, you know.
Yeah, that is an interesting fact for me. Now, I didn't know the La-Di-Das. I never saw them, but I did hear that one hit, you know, Going to See My Baby Tonight.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by that. I really liked that when I was young, but I never saw the band at all.
Yeah.
They didn't last very long, huh?
No, well, they went to England because they made a big splash in Australia, but it doesn't last long. You start going on the merry-go-round, you start going down. So they were smart enough to go to England, but they suffered in England. They were eating cornflakes most days of the week. No money, stealing eggs from the farm next door just for breakfast. No money, and basically had a massive break. They got offered Come Together, Beatles, right? Because the Beatles weren't going to put it out. So they were signed with a big English record company and did Come Together, which was going to break them worldwide. But guess what? Just as on the eve of that coming out, the Beatles decided to put out Come Together. Mm-hmm. So it completely ruined those chances, and they came back to Australia. But while they were in England, they took on board, just like Fraternity. Have you ever heard of Fraternity?
Yes.
With Bon Scott?
We were talking about Flack earlier, and that's what I got them mixed up for some reason.
Yeah. Well, Fraternity, the same thing happened with Fraternity, that they became band freaks, the band in America, and lived like the band, all in one house. All their songs they wrote were like the band. Well, when La-Di-Das came back from England, they took on board Traffic. Traffic were the greatest thing in England at the time, and the La-Di-Das hero worshipped Traffic. So I don't know if it was a good move, but they became Traffic.
The Australian version of Traffic.
Traffic. Everything was like with Kevin playing flute, and all the songs were based on Traffic style. Right. And they put out an album called Little Prince, which was very Traffic, and again...
And they sang like Stevie Winwood?
Yep.
Right.
Well, Phil Key was Australia's Stevie Winwood because he had the same range and the same tone.
Right.
So it was, when you saw the La-Di-Das in their second incarnation, it was Traffic, and the same thing happened again. They were so good that, you know, the local bands again, we just didn't have a chance. They were unique and original, apart from following Traffic, but they didn't copy the songs. Their style became influenced by Traffic.
Yeah. How did you hook up with Kevin eventually?
Well, he finally broke up the La-Di-Das and wanted to put on together his own Serious Power trio, which he called on me, I guess, because by then I'd established a name with Copper Wine and Renee and everybody, so I was the guy to come to. the drummer we had was Barry Harvey, Little Goose, who was a drummer from Chain. So that trio, we toured flat out all over Australia with, it's called the Kevin Borridge Express. And guess who named that band? Renee.
All right.
She came to a gig at one of the big Melbourne pubs and she said, "Hey Kev, that sounds like an express train, that band." So that was how the Kevin Borridge Express started. It was just Kevin Borridge band first, but after Renee gave him that idea, it became the Express forever.
Yeah. Well, did you go to America with him?
No. He went to America with Paul Christie.
Right. Okay.
And John Annis.
Right.
And serious hard times again, just like La-Di-Da's in England. They struggled, no food. Chuggy was their manager, and he basically subsidised them for long enough, and I think he finally said, "Enough, boys, it's not working, you got to come back." So Kevin brought a great American Hammond player back and made it a four-piece for a little while. So he came back, and from there on he seriously started getting notoriety for being a great guitar player, performer. So his heyday when he came back started from then, and he became Australia's greatest there for a few years. You know, big name, playing at the Opera House with all the greats, with like Bob Jackson on bass, all the best musos.
Yeah.
So,
what year did he go to America?
Around 77 to about 78, and then he came back, and from there on it was all Australia. And he's never stopped since. He's probably and luckily enough, he's an amazing driver. He'll drive for 14 hours where I can't drive for 2 hours without losing it, you know. But he's just a road warrior.
You need John Mithson.
Yeah, well, I don't know about John's driving, but Kev was. We would always be asleep, and Kev would just go hour and hour and hour and hour and hour, and all he'd need was a cup of coffee. Or whatever.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. His work ethic must be amazing. We got to interview him, but it was only very short. It was only about a 15, 20 minute. I'd love to sit with him again and get a long interview.
Well, you should, because I mean, he could tell you stuff that you wouldn't believe. You know, he has a lot of experience in what it's like to be a road warrior.
Yeah, sure. How many albums did you record with Kevin? Because he's not known to be prolific record.
No, well, Tim Partridge was the bass player for Kev, because I'd spent 2 years touring incessantly, and I was burnt out, and I moved to Byron Bay, and Tim Partridge moved in on bass, and that's when he did his first serious record. So I only did a few tracks produced by Clive Shakespeare, recording-wise, at Trafalgar. So, but in the last few years, I did all his albums, and I've done everything he's done in the last 15 years, so I made up for it as far as recording input.
As it got into the 80s, what were you doing then?
Well, Renee took over with Say I Love You was a massive hit, so I came on board with Renee for years after that. And then 4 years later, they were basically an amazing story. My friend John Watto is a drummer from Australian Crawl. They were having trouble getting a groove for this song for their brand new album with Australian Crawl, and Watto, which is bless his heart, he said, "Well, listen, my mate in Sydney's got a pretty good groove. I reckon he could get a groove in this song." So they brought me down for one song, flew me down. Yeah, in those days they had money to burn. There was so much money around, and so I did this one song, and the guy said, "Well, you know, there's another track here that's not that great. How about trying that?" So I did that, and another one, and then I went back to Sydney over the weekend. Monday I get the call, "Oh, listen, we've got some more." So by the end, there was only one track left that the original bass player of Australian Crawl had played on. They said, "Well, listen, this is one he actually played pretty good on, you know," and he was a good bass player, but I think James Rain had moved on with his songwriting to another style, much more advanced. And so basically said, "Well, this is the only track that we think he played great on, but we're going to go out to the Japanese restaurant." They left me in the biggest recording studio in Australia, Armstrong's, on my own. And so I smoked a joint, pressed the record, and by the time they came back, I did it. So I did the whole album, and I thought, well, you know, this is looking pretty good. If I did the whole album, surely, you know, they've got to ask me to join, which happened a couple of weeks later. So from then I was on board for a couple of years doing that album and the Final Wave album with Ozzy Crawl, and experiencing what it was like to have success and thousands of people at every gig, and a roadie who would basically take your bass off you, brand new strings just about every gig. So it was like, you know, from someone who was quite, you know, comes from experience of slogging it out in the trenches, I was right up there experiencing the great hotel rooms, hire cars, and fun. And they were a fantastic bunch of guys. Brad Robinson, James Rain, Simon Binks, really good guys. They weren't the rock star types in the sense that all it was for them was about the fun. And James Rain was seriously the only guy that was serious about, I want to really get good at this. And whereas all the rest of the guys would be partying, well, James, I could hear him in his room writing new song. Like he wanted to really develop, whereas the other guys it was much more fun. So thank God for John Watson bringing me into that, because, you know, on that sort of money, I ended up getting great gear, great basses, and so I moved up a bit.
Because, I mean, Renee she was never in that league that they were at that.
No,
period, huh?
It was a different scene in that soul scene, like Max Merritt had it. It wasn't a pop thing, you know, so...
Yeah.
And I played with Mark Hunter in those days. He was a fantastic, I mean, what a voice, like a honey voice.
What was the lineup?
That was basically John, it was the Kev Borich band backing Mark Hunter on tours and stuff.
John Watson on drums, what were you saying?
John Ennis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and toured New Zealand, and basically did two gigs and was cancelled, lack of ticket sales.
Wow.
So in New Zealand it wasn't happening, you know, there was no big Dragon sort of spin-off.
Right.
So we came back. Unfortunately, after that tour, 6 months later he got diagnosed with his illness, which is such a shame, because he would have really gone on to be you know, like one of the ultimate singers, because the incredible thing is he never really had much of an ego as a singer, and he didn't realise that he was that good.
And a catalogue of songs that very few people have.
Yeah, the voice and you know, the songs were like ultimate pop hits, just amazing.
Yeah, nothing like it. I had seen Dragon and today with Mark Williams, and they're fantastic. But those songs are just
that's why. Well, why they Dragon do well, because why shouldn't they go out and let people experience those magic songs? And I think it's fantastic.
Todd.
Yeah. I mean, it's and also Todd was 50% of the chemistry, in the sense that he was a great pump and pick bass player, rock. He was probably the number one in those days, and he had that amazing high harmony that would just break through. Just like Paul was saying from the Screaming Jets, if you see him do harmonies, he doesn't even need a mic on him. He's just, wow, it just cuts through anybody. It's just powerful, perfect harmony. So there's not many of those guys that can do that.
You know, the 90s, what happened for you?
Well, it was pretty full on Renee and Kevin Borich. So it was they were my main acts. And I think the greatest thing that happened to me was around 2001, because of Kev. He basically told Chuggy was putting a show together with Billy Thorpe, Long Way to the Top. And he was talking to Chuggy, and Chuggy's thinking, who should we get for the house band? And Kev basically said, we should got to get Mark Kennedy and Harry Brus as the rhythm section, you know. And so he scored us that gig, and with that gig I started a brand new career backing Brian Cadd, Russell Morris. Russell I toured with in 1972, so we're old mates from way back, and he's one of the top guys, you know, a really funny guy who doesn't take it seriously at all. So all those Keith Cotton Morris, all these great acts now were available to me because of A Long Way to the Top and showing that we did a great job. I was getting call for everything from those people. Brian Cadd, just mighty songs, all the best artists. So it was a big break.
And what was the original lineup of Black Feather? Did you come into it, or were you?
Yeah, well, it was recorded by Al Cash and Bob Fortescue on bass. They were the rhythm section with John Robinson. And to my amazement, whether they left of their own free will or got cheesed off or something, they left even before the massive Seasons of Change hit. So by the time I joined,
so I had done Bop and the Blues.
This is way before. This is 3 years before Bop and the Blues, and basically Seasons of Change was #1 when I joined the band. So you can imagine joining a band, and I turned down Carver's Dude.
Yes.
Bob Daisy had left to go to England to become one of the world's great rock bass players, and the place was vacant. But I joined Black Feather and basically enjoyed playing in this psychedelic band where, John Robinson's guitar solos, one guitar solo would last 25 minutes. You think about that, 25 minutes of a guitar solo, never boring, because you had 1,000 people cross-legged tripping on acid following that guitar journey, the solo journey. So, I mean, it wasn't boring, it was just people locked in. And that's where John learned a lot of his stuff.
In Black Feather?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I only know those two songs, Seasons of Change and Bop and the Blues. I never saw that band either, so I have no picture of what
I think
like.
It was seriously bad timing for John and Neil Johns to fall out. Just as the record hit #1, they tossed out the lead singer, which was crazy when you think back on it now. These days that wouldn't happen, because they'd be smart enough to realise, well, we'll ride this out, even if it happens after the record goes down, but let's reap the rewards. And Neil Johns was tossed out, and I became the lead vocalist, and we became a trio, but it didn't work, mainly because there's no way I was going to sing like Neil Johns and get those notes, so we had to adapt the songs to my range, and it didn't work. So we did that for a while and broke up, and John and I joined the house band at a place called Jonathan's in Broadway. 6 days a week we used to rehearse, playing Friday and Saturday, and our paycheck was $50 a week for like rehearsing 5 days a week. Yeah, $50 was a lot in those days. And he was basically the other band that this manager John Spooner took under his wing was Sherbet, right? And I remember sitting there watching Daryl Braithwaite reading the Sydney Morning Herald, and John Spooner would say, no, this is about learning how to phrase the words properly. That's why Daryl Braithwaite's phrasing of the words is so good, because he learned from reading and being wrapped over the knuckles by, this is how you do it, this is how you enunciate. So he learned it back then. And it was an amazing experience to see Daryl there reading, and John Spooner would say, no, this is how you say this.
We got into the 2000s. What happened for you then?
Well, like I said, from then on it was all Russell Morris, Brian Cadd, Renee, always Renee. And
so what year was Long Way to the Top? I forgot.
2001.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, around the time of 9/11. So when we went out on the regional tour, 9/11 had happened, so it was a strange time, very strange. But an incredible show in the sense that we were very well looked after, well paid, and we got to hang out with the cream of Australia's talent. So it was exciting. You're on a bus with people that you, as a kid or whatever, young, you looked up to and sort of almost idolised, like Thorpe. I was a Thorpe freak, because I used to support Thorpe at Surf City in 1965 in my band. So, I mean, to actually be up there playing with Thorpe, backing up Thorpe, this is ridiculous. So I've been very lucky in that sense of hooking in with some serious vocalists.
And Harry, you've got a CD out now.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's about 18 musicians on that. Mick Skelton, Paul Wheeler from Ice House, some amazing guitar players, Adam Pringle, Paul Burton, just all came to my aid to put together all my original songs. I do all the vocals and had some real great help there. But that was a great experience, because when you think all you've done is back people up your whole life, to actually do your own thing with all your own songs, it's pretty exciting. And it was a great experience. I'm into the second one now, but it was such a mighty experience to see, because I'd hooked up with so many amazing musicians. They were all there. Whenever I rang and said, can you do this? They were there like a shot. Here's Mick Skelton, who's Baby Animals drummer, one of the greatest, probably the #1 session guy in Australia, and I rang him up, and he arrives with a van full of drums and basically unpacked everything in the yard, set it up in my basement, and then I went to give him some money. He said, no, anytime you need me, just call me. So, I mean, this is the attitude of when you get... And also, I remember in the early days with Mick, I pulled Mick into everything I did, which Russell Morris. So I did give him a bit of a kick-off, but it was seriously so nice of all these guys to come to my aid and be there. And I had the pick of all the greats. So even though it was done in my basement, there's some really wonderful playing on there.
And what's coming up for you, mate?
Well, it's still... I've got my own band, which is doing festivals all over the joint at the moment, and gigs. So it's great to be calling the shots with the musos you hire, the repertoire. I've got some core musicians that I formed a relationship. Mitchell Anderson is probably the strongest hookup I've had with an artist since Renee Gayer, because with Renee living in Melbourne and using Melbourne guys, I really missed soul music, and Mitch brought in the soul music aspect. We hooked up 25 years ago at the beginning. We've been together ever since. Maybe we might not play sometimes for 6 months, but then flat out week after week in the following months. So he injected the soul back into my life, and he's still my main guy that I have in my band. I play in his band, and we sort of seesaw around in different bands, but we really connect, because it's when you've sort of had a relationship for over 20 years, there's something that happens. It's you don't think, just like Renee, you don't think twice. And he's seriously, apart from Doug Parkinson, just my favourite male vocalist.
Well, Harry, would you play us out and tell us a little bit about your gear before you do?
Well, I've been lucky enough to get sponsored by Wayne Jones here, who's got a range of new amps that are seriously cutting edge, and some of the top bass players in America have taken these amps on board. They're in Japan and all over the world now, so he's sort of put together a rig that really kicks. So, and basically I just want to play a bit of a style. After 50 years of playing, I've developed a style that you won't find on YouTube or anywhere, which is called a reverse four-finger technique, which is playing everything with one finger. But so it's you know, it's crazy that other people don't do it, because it opens you up for accents, which is a spring up, which you can't get forward. All bass players play forward like that, but that is like when a drummer kicks off on a bass drum backwards. So it's sort of enabled me to get my own style, but amazing speed that you can get with one finger. So I wouldn't mind playing a bit of that.
Surely. Thanks.